Hello, South Africa. It's time. It's time to change history in our nation. I have the privilege of sitting here today with Costa Mitchell. He's got such a heart for our country. He's been part of a move of God. And we want to hear, because we're expecting a move of God in our country now. So, Costa, thank you for giving us your time. You're such a general in the faith and a Greek.
Yes.
It all started there.
Greek
Thank you for giving us your time. And you've been part of a movement of God.
Yes.
And you know what's going on in the 22nd of April. We're trusting God for mighty outpouring in our nation. Why do you think this is a good time?
Lindy Ann, I think we are in a time of the clash of powers at a level we've seldom seen before. And it's not only South Africa, but worldwide. But we are experiencing it here in unique ways. You spoke about the fact that I've been in a move of God. In fact, a move of God that started back in the 70s and that culminated for us in terms of what was called the birth of the Vineyard movement in the late 70s and early 80s. But I say started in the 70s, the end of the 60s even, in what was called the Jesus People Revival. Which was a worldwide phenomenon, and something that also came about in a similar time when people had got sick and tired of the mediocrity and of the materialism and of from the church side the religious laws that had actually boxed people in, and I think it made the Holy Spirit fed up as well, and so that's why it overflowed from there. We were involved in ministry on the streets and in Hillbrow, and that became the beginning of something that swept this country. And so the Vineyard movement was one of the churches that was born out of that revival, in the form of people like Lonnie Frisbee, John Wimber himself, who was a musician involved in the drug culture and all of those things, owned a rock band, and God turned him on his head. So why I mention all of those things is because when I think about revival, I think about something that turns people and societies, communities on their head. And that's what I saw, I experienced that, and so once again I'm fully expectant that it's time for South Africa to have the same thing.
So how do you believe we can actually prepare ourselves for this move of God?
I think the main thing is for us as God's people to do what we've heard the verse quoted so many times, 2 Chronicles 7:14, to examine our hearts, that we need to recognize our own the potential for our own hearts to be deceived. I was involved in this action on the streets today at Parliament, and a wonderful thing at one level to see hundreds of thousands of South Africans from every city in our country coming onto the streets to say enough is enough. What are they upset about? Probably many things, and probably with many different motives. But in amongst all of that, there are God's people who are saying what we need is a restoration of righteousness.
Yes.
What we need is a restoration of justice for the poor, and that's something that we must. It must begin in our hearts. The Micah 6:8 thing about do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. That's where God's people have to start. And so I'm expecting that the event, April the 22nd, I believe that event is going to be a place where people can bring that to a kind of a crisis moment of surrender, expectation, faith, confession, and then taking it to the streets from there, into every city in our country.
So what do you actually believe is revival?
Revival is a supra-rational move where something is in the air that you can't define, you can't control, there's no magic formula, but it's almost as though I mean, the way I experience it as a pastor is that when we're in a place of revival, you can stand on your head and say, "Bar, bar, black sheep," and everybody wants to be saved. In other words, it's not dependent on our strength or our smartness or on our religious performance. It's not based on, even, I personally think, it's not even based on our faith. It's based on our availability and just kind of stepping into something which God is doing. Maybe I should just say my personal view of ministry is that in any event, none of us has a ministry. What we have is the opportunity to step into God's ministry. And that's what Jesus spoke about. He said, "I only do what I see the Father doing." That's why his ministry was effective. And the secret of revival is when there are enough people who are just available to do that, and that intersects with God's plan, the fulfillment of God's purpose in a nation or a community. I mean, I've seen revivals happen in a community, and I've seen revivals happen not only nationwide but internationally. And so I think we are, when we talk about revival, we're talking about that kind of extraordinary atmosphere, an environment where the Holy Spirit is busy and human beings just have the privilege of falling into the things that he's doing. And so it manifests itself primarily in large numbers of conversions, of people coming to radical faith that transforms their lives. It is accompanied with signs and wonders.